What was the weirdest thing the weird kid at your school did? He used to sit alone at lunch. Not because no one wanted to sit with him, but because he used to drag all the other chairs away from the table and leave just one chair for himself. Then he laid out his lunch items around the edge of the table and moved his seat around the table as he ate each item. This one girl would pick green anole lizards up off the ground and make them bite her ears, then walk around saying they were earrings for like 2 minutes until they fell off. She'd also shut herself into lockers a lot then start screaming. Took a nap in class while they were asleep, pretended that they were possessed, got on all fours, and started barking at people. He bit one of his friends. This was all done with his eyes closed. When asked why he did that, he responded that it was because he was so in tune with the wolves that they sometimes channel through him in his sleep. He also carried a fake human skull around in his bag at all times. We don't have wolves in New Zealand and I know for a fact he never left the country. Gotta say, we've had some weird kids. Back in middle school during art everyone was silent while drawing until this chick straight up moans, "Yes daddy." As our male student teacher walked by, I shit you not, the look of pure embarrassment and stone cold regret was so glued to his face, he would cringe at her for the rest of the semester. He brought a knife to school to stab me personally. Apparently he had a crush on my GF at the time. Fortunately, I guess, someone ratted him out. Cut some girl's hair and ate it. I saw him again today. He was wearing a trench coat and a cowboy hat. Philip was the weird kid. I only heard him speak once, and it was to say yes. I had 2 classes with him. It was so iconic that the whole class froze in disbelief that he spoke. The weirdest thing he would do is randomly fall out of his chair. You'd just hear a loud as thump and him on the ground. Sometimes when he'd walk to another class, he'd take off running, anime style with arms behind him. Beat off into a copy of Catcher in the Rye during a class trip to the big city library and reshelve it. Then he told the whole class about it, proudly, in front of a horrified teacher and librarian. She was a furry, and so was her boyfriend. She would wear a tail to school and hiss at people. Really bad PD issues with her boyfriend, and she would sometimes masturbate while kissing him. Fucking weird ass bitch. In kindergarten, this kid we will call Richard, one day we were all told to stand up and say our favorite thing to do, then do it. Richard was the 15th to go and was next to the pet frog and screamed, "I like to eat frogs." He grabbed the frog out so smooth and bit his head. I know a lot of weirdos. This one dude in my class was an artsy. He did the Hail Hitler thing for the class photo. Another one stapled a huge spider into a plastic cup and paraded that thing around the school. Somebody else read and reviewed hardcore gay mangas in very close proximity to my teacher. A guy at my school tried to jump out of the bus window while we were riding down the highway. He also would scream, cry, and blather on about how his ex-girlfriends were mean to him. He also made a point to punch trees regularly. Surprisingly, he never masturbated on school campus, although he did try to commit suicide in the hall. He once asked me out, and even though he was quite the catch, I unfortunately said no. Wrote a really violent and gore-filled short story, about 10 pages, each week, usually about some woman getting gruesomely murdered during sophomore English, and would enthusiastically volunteer to read it aloud during each class, and then laugh hysterically when we were visibly uncomfortable. When I was in high school, there was this kid who spent all day looking at Google Maps and books of maps. One day in English class we were having a lazy day with the teacher telling about our personal lives. This kid stands up walls over and was like, sometimes he'll take a bike pump and put it in my butt and pump it up so I can fart long and loud. This kid lived in a foster home with several other kids. Another time at lunch we decided to take all the condiments and put it in some chocolate milk and sarcastically ask, "Who wants to drink this?" Without hesitation he said I will, then proceeded to chug it and ask for another. Everyone in the lunchroom lost their shit. Dude would just carry around a couple of those big 2-liter bottles of Mountain Dew and chug that shit down in the middle of class, high school. But he'd drink it like a child with his mouth completely around the opening, so the whole bottle would contract whenever he sucked his precious dew in. The sight and sound was really discomforting to everyone around him. He got very fat in his 20s and now uses social media to complain about how nobody likes or understands him. Finally, in a development that surprised nobody, he got a visit from the type 2 diabetes fairy not long ago. Still does the due on the reg. Kinda sad BC. I think he had some autism mixed with some other mental health issue. He would quote movie plots, but claim they were from his life. Like he supposedly ate shrooms in the desert and was so high he fell back into the sand and saw the Star Wars font spelling out "You are very high in the sky." That's a scene in Fanboys. Then his parents took him to Europe for 2 months, but in fact he was home the whole time and sent a selfie from his bedroom to a friend of mine. He also claimed he was a kelpie, the seals that shed their skin and walk like humans. We lived in the desert. He was just sad with his life, but craved attention and was bad at not being weird. We were all cringe in HS, but he was especially cringe. The kid from my high school is someone everyone here on Reddit is probably familiar with, Wolfie. The guy who did that furry documentary where he says on all levels, but physical I'm a wolf. That kid was a wacko. He wore a tail and a pair of ears to school every day and forced the school to change the name of his school's ID to Wolfie. But all of this was okay, believe it or not. No one really cared that he was weird. It was his attitude about it. He developed this me against the world complex, making it where it was impossible to have a conversation with him about anything because he always got so defenses and started to provoke others. Also, he did bite me outside of a Target a year after he graduated because I called him his real name. I was just trying to be polite and say hey. We had a kid in our class who was overall weird but seemed like a decent dude. He reminded me of Jack Black. He would rock the air guitar, karate kick the school doors at final bell, do oddball impressions of God knows what. In senior year I had cafeteria class with him. That's that class all the weird kids and stoner kids took. Easy credits. We prepared the food served at lunch. One day I had to put some stuff away in our walk-in freezer. I opened the door and saw weird kid sitting on the floor, looking up at me in shock, like he had been busted. He quickly scrambled to his feet, covered himself with his apron, and ran past me into the main area. I don't know what the hell he was doing in there. I'm just glad I could never afford cafeteria food. Bonus story. We used to have this bucket of powder in cafeteria. It was used to soak up the oil spills from the deep fryer. I didn't know this, and the bucket was labeled seasoning salt. I assume it was an old label. One day I was in charge of cooking the batches of fries served at lunch. I sprinkled that shit all over the fries. It wasn't until a week or two later I noticed someone using the same bucket to soak up an oil spill on the floor, and the seasoning salt was in an entirely different place. This was years ago, so I'm a bit foggy on the details. There was a kid that was always super odd and everyone avoided him. He didn't seem to be good at reading the room. He would constantly tell people he was a Martian from space and that he was sent here on a mission. One particular day at the end of a science class and most of the other kids had left the classroom, I think of my classmates had kept telling him that he wasn't a Martian or something like that, to his breaking point. He put a scissors to my classmate's neck and was saying thing about how he could prove it. The teacher immediately put an end to it and yelled at him. I remember him being escorted down the hall rambling about how we would all see that he was a Martian. I guess he was expelled because I never saw him after that. Kinda always wondered if he ever got help or if he still believes he is a Martian. He was caught masturbating in class by the worst possible person, the shrill loud girl. Obviously, she screamed and yelled weird kid is masturbating, and everyone in the room stood up, trying to get a glimpse of the kid jerking his gherkin. Mayo why, except by that point he had tucked it away and was crying uncontrollably. Open bracket. The next day, he kissed his best friend full on the lips, and the best friend cried. They stopped being friends for a long time after that. Both of them were heavily bullied for it. I feel bad for weird kid and his mate. They were okay kids. Weird kid just had autism, and I don't think anyone, including the teachers, knew how to work alongside him. He really didn't have the support he needed, and I don't think that class was good for him at all. It was rough. My niece was recently diagnosed with autism. She's always been worryingly quiet, but aside from that, she's pretty normal. I know she will be bullied in school like most other kids, but I hope she never encounters the bullying that my school's weird kid endured. She doesn't deserve it. He didn't deserve it. Sorry, Jonathan. I hope you're well.